What does it take to influence as a leader in a way that feels more authentic to you and the people that you want to inspire? I'm Eamonn O'Brien, and together with my great pal, Dr. Frank Hagenow, we talk about how you can bring together the magic of business psychology and storytelling to get a different result. Hey, Dr. Frank, how are we?
Hi, Eamonn. Nice to see you again.
Hey, listen, Frank. So I thought today we might have a look at an example in action, if you like, of how an organization moved towards more influence in how they did things than telling people, here's how I want it done. And so I picked Microsoft today. And in particular, I picked a fellow called Satya Nadella. And he is an interesting character because he came into Microsoft back in 2014. And he came in to an organization where they had two very strong people who had been in control of that company before. And he transitioned it, if you like, to a culture that used to be, we're Microsoft, we can do everything ourselves, we don't need anybody else. It's kind of like the Christopher Columbus, I don't need no stinking map. To one of being more open, being more collaborative, and one where there was a greater openness to making mistakes. Now, the reason I picked it is because there were a few stories as I listened to Satya that really just struck a chord with me, and I want to ask you a little bit about what you take from this and what leaders can learn from it. So, one of the first things that influenced his mentality and his openness to being more in the emotional space is that as a 29-year-old, as an engineer, he and his wife were about to have their first child, and they were thinking, great, so we're going to build a nursery. Our weekends might be a bit low on entertainment and excitement, but my wife will be back to being an architect in no time, blah, blah, blah. None of that happened, Frank, because their child was born with cerebral palsy. And all of a sudden, everything changed. Now, he said there was something interesting about his experience because at the outset, they were, and certainly he was, in a mindset of, why did this happen to us? But over time, he came to realize, actually, it didn't happen to us. It happened to our son. So his openness to thinking more deeply, more broadly, more empathetically with the situation was one of the first things that really kind of, if you like, took deeper part in his psyche. Second thing, though, is that in the organization before he took over, he tells an interesting story about how his boss, Steve Ballmer, asked him into the office one day and said, hey, you know this Bing thing we have, this search engine? Yeah, it's not really taking Google to the cleaners. Can we do something to fix this? And so I'm sure Satya was kind of, thinking, woe is me, I don't know that I want this conversation. But anyway, he said, look, I want you to go in there, but if this goes well, we'll be delighted with you. But if it doesn't, you probably won't have a job.
Oh, how motivating, all right?
How motivating, yeah. So the bottom line is that there was that kind of up or out mentality and this aversion to making mistakes. So he has evolved things to the point where he believes that as a CEO, his job in the C part is to create a culture that inspires belonging, bravery, confidence in his people to excel. So my question to you is from a psychology perspective, when you want to transition to greater motivation and trust in leadership, what can we take from his experiences and what can people learn in general about doing a better job?
I think the difficulty he has to deal with, or he had to deal with, was that there was a completely different culture when he came into the company. And so shifting a culture within a company is quite a big deal because people are used to do things like they did it in the past. And especially when it is a culture of law and order, of some kind of giving orders and controlling, people are often very, very interested in being secure, being safe, and not being held responsible for their mistakes. And so this is something which takes a little time to shift because you also have to shift the mindsets of the people.
Yeah, well, and you're quite right. I mean, you do have to shift minds, and it's not overnight. And interestingly, so I mentioned that he became CEO in 2014. So it's now 2020. But when he came in, their stock price was trading at about $40 a share. Today, it's getting close to, and it has been up to almost $200 a share. So there's been quite the transition, but what has really happened has been there's been a sea change to being more open to change and not thinking that you have to know it all yourself. Why is that so important in terms of how people assess you as a leader and also how they assess themselves?
Thinking of mistakes, mistakes are quite inevitable and they will happen anywhere, and sometimes it's even good when they are happening because this gives you the chance to adjust quite early without many costs you would have had afterwards. And so it's even within our human nature to make mistakes, and so coming to a more mistake friendly culture will also lead to more profit at the end.
Yeah, for sure. And let's take that a little bit deeper again, because again, going to one of the things that he felt was really, really important for him at the outset as he tried to change the culture, change how people behaved, how they thought. He also really wanted to kind of bring people back to a more defining type of purpose, a more inspiring form of purpose. And so he went back to, like a lot of people go back to origin stories, but he really wanted to get to the essence of the question of why did they exist? What were they there to do that would make a difference for the people that they served? And could he make that more meaningful to everyone within the organization so that they could have greater ownership, greater sense of belonging? How difficult can that be? And if you were giving advice to leaders on how to create a greater combined share or sense of purpose, what would you suggest?
I think it's all about trust, and people have to trust you. But the problem with trust is you can't build trust actively. Trust is something which has to be earned, and trust grows within your counterpart when he or she decides that you are trustworthy. So it's about being reliable and keeping your promises so people will trust you in a long-term perspective.
And so, if there was one thought then that you would leave with our audience today on creating more lasting effects from the stories that you share with your audiences, the people you want to influence, that would cause people to be more self-motivated, self-propelled rather than controlled, what would you suggest?
It's about setting people free to be creative and be passionate about their work. And this means you have to reduce this culture of controlling and trying to hide from negative consequences, so that people can unleash their potential and thrive your business.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, on that bombshell of unleashing potential, we're all about that, Frank, as always. I've enjoyed this conversation, and I'm also looking forward, Frank, to the next time when we get together and we'll get into a lot more detail about how to, if you like, ignite your audience as a leader. Thanks, Frank.
Thank you, Eamonn. See you next time.